Look at this picture of this guy over here with the enormous lapels and the turtleneck.
That's right.
That's so funny.
Yeah, always wear timeless clothes, right?
I
See,
have
this suit was never going to be like.
Live stream in about 10 seconds.
Okay.
Julie is going to do it behind us.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's Hinckley Forum. My name is Julia Martin, and I will be the forum host for today's conversation. The Hinckley Institute of Politics is a nonpartisan institute at the University of Utah. The Hinckley provides an array of transformative experiences for students through internships, forums, and classes. Hinckley forums seek to foster public discourse and civil debates on the most current and pressing issues, bringing in local, national, and international thought leaders. We want to thank the Gardner Policy Institute for their partnership in organizing this event. Today's forum is titled Love Your Enemies with Arthur C. Brooks. Arthur C. Brooks is the William Henry Bloomberg Professor of Practice of Public Leadership at the Harvard Kennedy School and Professor of Management Practice at the Harvard Business School. Before joining Harvard faculty in July 2019, he served for 10 years as president of Washington, D.C.-based American Enterprise Institute, one of the world's leading think tanks. As a behavioral social scientist, prolific author, and in-demand speaker, Mr. Brooks has given over 1,400 speeches in the last decade in 145 cities around the world. Arthur engages his audiences using a blend of cutting-edge science, ancient wisdom, philosophy, music, and art, while delivering real-life strategies for lifting people up, bringing them together, and improving happiness for all. Mr. Brooks was recently named a University of Utah Impact Scholar. As part of the engagement, Mr. Brooks will spend 3 to 4 days in Utah per semester over the next 3 years. We look forward to our continued collaboration with him. We have much we can learn. Today, Mr. Brooks will be joined in conversation by Jason Berry. Jason is the Vice President for Government Relations and the Director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics at the University of Utah. Jason brings more than 25 years of experience working in the public sector, where he has worked extensively with policymakers at the local, state, and federal level. Please join me in welcoming our guests.
Thank you, everyone. Dr. Brooks, good to have you with us.
Delighted to be here. I love being in Utah.
I have to say how important this is. The only thing better than pizza from the Pie, which they have just had.
Oh, is that the place in town?
That is the place.
No kidding.
Yeah.
How good is it? Should I go there? All right.
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
All right. No,
Next time.
we got a mixed vote here. We got a.
What? One no? Okay.
Was that a B? Is that a B or a B plus?
B plus.
All right.
Okay.
I'll take a B plus. It's
We're
better than
gonna-
what we get in Boston.
We're going to talk about how to have these difficult conversations today.
Okay.
Okay.
A partisan report on the pizza, right off the bat.
Yeah, right off the bat. You're modeling good behavior already. Do you mind, Dr. Brooks, take a moment and talk what it means with this post you're taking at the University of Utah as the Utah Impact Scholar? We love our connection with you all over the state we have. Why were you willing to do this one? What do you hope to get from it?
It's because it's an excuse to come to Utah. Are you kidding me? This place is great. It's when you live here, you kind of get used to all the nice things about this. But when you come from Massachusetts, let me tell you, your happiness goes up as soon as you see these mountains in this beautiful air. Okay, that's not the real reason. The whole point is that I'm engaged in the business of increasing happiness as much as I can, and I do a lot of work in public policy and politics, which is not exactly happiness provoking for most people. I mean, happiness is like a zombie religion and an engine of misery for most people. As interested as you are in it, the deeply you get into it, you have people who are trying to invest it and trying to make you as fearful and angry and hateful as possible. My job is to counteract that, but I have to go places where I might actually have a prayer of creating a movement where that can happen. So where do you go? I don't know, let's go to the state that has the best happiness rankings in the country. That's Utah. Now, not everybody's happy here, but there's a good happiness ecosystem, at least. You know, there's good fodder for actually creating a movement that actually might start here, where people have opinions, good, strong opinions, differences of opinion, and still like each other. That's why I'm here.
Excellent. You have a lot to teach us about this. I think it's interesting. I was just in Washington, D.C. for the past several days, and in anticipation of my conversation with you, I was listening to your book again, Love Your Enemies. And this part about happiness I thought was so interesting, because I was walking on the mall listening to you about your book, and I thought, wow, this does seem the place where we would find happiness. Which I think is interesting. And I was thinking a bit about the title of this book, which I think everyone should read if you had not had a chance, on Love Your Enemies. But one of the interesting things is you tie the title of that to some things you said at the end of the book, whether or not enemy is the right word.
Right.
Because often that's how we view people who disagree with us.
Right, yeah. No, I asked this question to, I've worked a lot with religious leaders all over the world. And one of the religious leaders I've worked with most intensively over the past 10 years is His Holiness the Dalai Lama. For those of you who don't know, this is the leader of the Tibetan Buddhist people. He's been in exile from mainland China since 1959 and has become the single most respected religious figure in the world over the last 60 years. The way that he's done that is through warm-heartedness and love, particularly to the people with whom he would normally have opposition. People who exiled him, for example, the people who disagree with him. He's actually shown how you can make common cause with people with whom you disagree, or you can love people with whom you disagree. How life is better when you do this. And he always talks about, you know, he'll say something, he'll quote Abraham Lincoln, who said that I destroy my enemies when I make them my friends. And I asked him one time, I said, do you have enemies and do you want to destroy them, Your Holiness? I mean, he's a pacifist. He believes in peace over all things. He says, no. What I want to destroy is not my enemies truly. I want to destroy the illusion that they were my enemies in the first place. And that's the key, isn't it? When you show love to somebody who's your enemy, it turns out that under very normal circumstances, that person wasn't your enemy after all. That's what makes it into kind of a vapor, it takes it into the realm of the ether. And the real person sitting in front of you, flesh and blood, and skin and bones, that's your brother or your sister. That's a person just like you.
When you talk about warm-heartedness, because you've even written some papers with His Holiness Dalai Lama too, is warm-heartedness the opposite of contempt?
Yeah, well, it is for him. So contempt is a word that I use a lot, and we know the word, but it's a really interesting concept. Contempt in philosophy is the conviction of the worthlessness of another person. So you think about that. Do you really think that somebody's worthless? I bet none of you think that another person is worthless. And yet contempt is engaging in behavior where you act as if you did. This is the way for you to have a permanent enemy forever. You know, if you treat somebody as if they were actually worthless, this is the ultimate insult to another person. And one of the things that's very interesting in human communication is the extent to which we treat other people with contempt as if they were worthless, and we don't even know we do it. So a lot of my writing is about how not to do that, how not to accidentally make permanent enemies. By the way, how do you do it? You roll your eyes when somebody says something. That is absorbed physically, neurophysiologically by the person with whom you're talking as you think that I'm worthless. Just that little thing. And you know, we do this. I mean, especially people under 30, like, right? Don't do that. If you're in love with somebody, never do that, because you're about to be alone. That's the best way to be single, is to do that. As a matter of fact, that's one of the key features in research on marriage, is that's one of the key takeaways, or one of the key tells that a couple is going to get divorced within the next 3 years. If they roll their eyes when the other person says something in the context of disagreement, that's how critically important that is. Contempt is, as a neuroscientific matter, it's a combination of two basic negative emotions that are produced in the limbic system of the brain. One is anger, which is the hot emotion. The other is disgust, which is a cold emotion that you should only ever have for a pathogen, a virus, or something that smells terrible, or something that's rotting, or something that makes you feel sick. When you mix those two things together, disgust and anger, it makes this contempt, and when you express it, usually inadvertently for other people, you have made a permanent enemy. And I don't know about you, but I can't afford more enemies, or any enemies.
That's right. So what's interesting is I was reading some of your work about contempt itself. A section of your book talks about how contempt is kind of a vice, and it is addictive. Let me talk about that.
So one of the reasons that people like to watch political TV. And I realize that most of you don't because you're not old. So you're not watching, MSNBC or, Fox News, which is like old people TV. I get it, and that's the reason that all the ads on Fox are for, tubs that you don't actually have to step over the thing. You can just open a door and get into. And
Those look really great.
And those chairs that take you up the stairs on a little conveyor belt, there's a reason that those are the ads on Fox News. That's right. They know their demographic, they know their audience. And increasingly, MSNBC has, buy gold kind of ads that, there's investment tips for old people. So, but you get the same thing when you're looking at political discourse on the internet. When you're looking at political discourse largely on social media. That's the cable TV for younger people, as it turns out. And it gives you a little thrill when somebody says something a little bit forbidden. The person that you don't like or that you disagree with politically, you read something that says that person is actually a fascist. And the reason that America is about to be in a civil war, and everybody who follows that particular politician actually hates America. And you don't exactly agree, and people that are followers of that politician, it's not quite true, but it gives you a little bit of a thrill. Now, what's going on for you when that happens? You're getting a little bit of the neuromodulator dopamine that's spritzed out into your brain. There's a little part of the brain called the locus ceruleus, and what it does is it takes, when you're taking stress hormones, it sprays it around your brain. And at the same time, when you're getting these neuromodulators of anticipation and reward, it's giving you a sense of thrill. And it doesn't just come from drugs and alcohol, and really, you think of it in bad things that ruin your life, like narcotics and excessive use of alcohol and gambling and pornography, bad stuff that you're shameful and you don't want, right? But it's also political discourse. We'll do the same thing. So thrilling little forbidden things will give you the same neuromodulator that will make you addicted to drugs and alcohol, and that will make you effectively addicted to bad speech, is what it comes down to. And America has a huge contempt addiction problem that's centering around this bad religion of politics. And that's a habit that I really want us to. I want us to have a 12-step, politics rehab program in America.
You suggest that it has as part of this, it has an impact on our health.
Yeah.
In what ways?
Well, one of the things that it impacts your health because it ruptures relationships, and good relationships with your family and friends, and having close friendships is very critical to your mental and physical health. That's just absolutely the case. The second thing is that you can easily put yourself into a constant state of anxiety and stress on the basis of this. And so you find that the more you pay attention to, and again, I'm at the Hinckley Institute for Politics, so I'm saying this under advisement, the more that you pay attention to politics, the worse you're going to feel. Anxiety and depression are positively correlated with attention to politics. So what should you do? You should limit all of your attention to politics to 30 minutes a day. You should ration it. And I recommend not doing it in the morning. Think of consuming political news in the morning like day drinking. It's a warning sign, right? It's like nobody normal says, yeah, I think I'm gonna have a couple beers with breakfast. That's not good. You don't do that. Even if drinking is permissible in your religious regime, you wouldn't do that because that's a dead giveaway. There's a problem. Think of politics in much the same way. It's important to be informed, I got it. But if it's your form of entertainment, especially a controversial part of your entertainment, look, if it's something that's interesting to you as an intellectual matter, that's fine, that's great. That's what we're all about, trying to make a better politics, making it an object of study, studying political science, that's great. But if your political entertainment is the outrage machine that's on the internet and you're doing it first thing in the morning, it's time to actually get help.
Well, can we talk about social media for a second?
Yeah, sure.
Because there's an interesting phrase that you use that I wonder about us, because it's not what many of us do. Online, never be anonymous.
Yeah.
You said that.
I did. And that's something that the guy who just bought Twitter yesterday apparently believes as well, but we'll see what actually happens from that.
I read that tweet.
Anonymity is a huge problem. There's a big social science body of research on anonymity. Anonymity lowers your moral standards, inevitably. People are less moral, more hostile, more hateful, more harmful when they're anonymous. And there's a ton of research on this. You find that there was a famous at the time, the end of the 19th century, the father of modern psychology, arguably. Well, there's two. I mean, there's William James at Harvard, who's the father of modern psychology. But in France, Gustave Le Bon was this incredible scientist, this behavioral scientist who created a good part of what we think of as modern psychology today. And he wrote at the time, very famous book called The Crowd. And what he said was that crowds of people are like unbelievably stupid, immoral people. And so they behave that way. And so what he did was he did kind of an intelligence and morality analysis on people as the groups got bigger. And the bigger the group gets, the worse they behave, the more chances that they take, the more violent they become, the more dehumanizing they become toward out-group members. And so there's a good reason for you never, never, never to be caught up in the frenzy of a crowd. Now, you can actually find cases in which it works the other way too. When I'm in a group of people that's trying to behave really beautifully and morally, in my religious community, sometimes it can be really wonderful to lose yourself in that. But in politics, it's a dangerous, dangerous business. And you see this all the time. You think about it when you see crowds of people at a rally for politicians you don't like. You're like, wow, that's dangerous. That's downright dangerous. But it's your side too, is the important thing to keep in mind. So that's why it's really critical for us to be individuals and own up to our individual behavior. What is the ultimate crowd in modern society? Social media. That's the ultimate crowd. The ultimate anonymous, immoral mass, lumpen mass of humanity is mobbing on social media, and it happens all the time. That's the reason that taking responsibility for the things that you say, for the things for the opinions that you express is critically important. Now, people will often say, yeah, well, what about in Iran? What about in Russia, where you actually do that and you'll come get arrested? My answer is, this is not Iran and this is not Russia. This is the United States, where I could literally write that I think the President of the United States is a fool and demented and an idiot and horrible. And there would be, nothing would happen to me. I'm a fairly public figure. Nobody would come to my house and arrest me. Nothing. I wouldn't even be on TV. I would get a few thousand comments on Twitter saying, how dare you say something like that? I might get a call from the dean of my university. Probably not. But that's pretty low stakes, friends. That's pretty low stakes. And so I think that in a free society, we need to work to continue to have radically free speech, to let people express themselves the way they will. And the way that we do that is by owning up to our own free speech. So it's free speech for you and free speech for me, and transparency for you and transparency for me. And that's a society in which we can actually interact with each other in a full and healthy way.
As we interact on social media, of course, it's designed to feed you what you like.
Yeah.
And the ultimate confirmation bias
Yeah.
always. The more I click on that, the more I get. Some advice you would give to students and all of us as we're interacting online to make sure we're eating our broccoli along with dessert.
Yeah. So don't think of opposing points of view as broccoli to begin with, unless you love broccoli. I love broccoli. I'm crazy about broccoli. Ever since I was a little kid, I know it makes me weird. But the key thing is that ideas that are different than yours are super important to you, should be super interesting to you. Like, bring it on. Come sit next to me. Now, that is not natural. That is absolutely not natural. If you go to the New York Times app to read news, and you read an op-ed that says that former President Trump is a bad guy, or it was a bad president, it will, as soon as you click on that, it'll set up the algorithm to take you down. And what do I mean by down? To fire you up into greater levels of anger and hostility. It knows already you're interested in reading an op-ed that said that President Trump was a bad president. So the next one will say President Trump is a bad human being. And the next one is that President Trump's supporters are bad human beings. So the next one after that will be that we're on the brink of civil war because of President Trump's supporters, and on and on and on. What is it working on? It's working on your dopamine circuits. It's working on trying to give you more. You hit the lever, and each level down, you have to amplify the experience so that you can continue to get these hits of dopamine, this neuromodulator of anticipation and reward, which is one of the reasons that they do that. They do not have your interests at heart. They're using you. All of these algorithms on the internet that try to get you to become more radical, they just want your eyeballs. They want you to look at ads. They want to fire you up and get more clicks, and they want to get more visits. They're conscripting you as soldiers as involuntary soldiers into their culture war. And we need to stand up to that. And the first way that we can stand up to that is by understanding how the algorithms work that are trying to manipulate us as human beings.
So how do we find it then? How do we make sure we get it? We get it both, all the sides.
Yeah, to begin with, if you are basically surfing around, you're playing their game. Don't surf around. Only look at things on purpose. Second, make sure you have a balanced diet. To say, I'm going to look at things, people that I ordinarily agree with, but I'm not going to look at things I ordinarily agree with that are a little more radical than I think. That's manipulation. I'm going to look at people who I think, who more or less see the world the way that I do to understand their arguments, but I'm also in a balanced diet going to look at particular people that I think are intelligent and thoughtful, but I disagree with them. You need to build a balanced diet. Now, the fact that you're here at this institute means that you're sophisticated and interested enough in politics to actually try to understand as opposed to getting your, I mean, it's like, there's no reason for me to make a lot of these comments to you. You don't have this problem, but your friends do. A lot of your friends, your super ideologically aligned friends where, who are engaged in this unbelievably vitriolic culture war, they need to hear this more than you do. So pass it on, is that you need a balanced diet or you're simply going to be uninformed and you're going to be manipulated by people who want you to be in their army.
So this idea of understanding these other points of views and the balanced diet, I thought it was very interesting how seldom, if we just kind of go down that rabbit hole a little bit with what we like, how we don't hear what you call the power of the personal stories.
Right.
Because once we do, maybe we could talk about a couple examples there as, how my view and what I want to get changes when I understand the story of another.
Yeah. No, one of the best ways for people to make you into a soldier in their culture war is by dehumanizing the other side. This is the oldest trick in the book. There's a part of the brain that's right outside the limbic system. It's in the neocortex, but it governs disgust. It's called the insula, or the insular cortex. Now, here's the amazing thing. That's been around for millions of years. And the reason is because you must perceive disgust so you don't ingest pathogens. That's the reason that things are disgusting to you. But here's the amazing thing about human life and how we've evolved. Over the past 50,000 years or so, we've had the neocortex of the brain has developed to the point that we can also have moral disgust, right? Moral disgust, not just physical disgust. Here's the most interesting thing that I've learned in the study of neuroscience, or one of the most interesting things. The same part of the brain governs moral and physical disgust, the insula. So you'll actually look at people under fMRI, and you'll look at the part of the brain that's illuminated when they're having different experiences. And if you show them, something like rotting food, the insula is like ding, ding, ding. It's lit up like a Christmas tree. And then if you talk to them about a group of people that they find morally repugnant, same part of the brain. Okay, now let's say that you're a demagogic, manipulative leader that wants child soldiers that are conscripted into her culture war, or his. Okay? How am I going to do that? I'm going to use dehumanizing language to activate your insula every time you hear about these people, these people, these people. That's the reason, by the way, that Hitler talked about Jews and called them rats and cockroaches. Why did the propaganda machine of the Nazi regime refer to our brothers and sisters as rats and cockroaches? Because people are not really repugnant, but rats and cockroaches are repugnant in every culture. Nobody likes rats and cockroaches. So you dehumanize to activate the insula. This is right out of the genocide playbook. That's what happens all the time. Those people, you know what those people think? The most noxious thing you can read, by the way, is where somebody on your side is explaining the motives to you of the other side. That's always what they do. You know what they really want? You know what those Democrats really want? You know what those Republicans, you know what they really want? They just want white supremacy. They just want racism. You know what those Democrats really want? They just want to kill babies. What is that? What are we trying to do? We're trying to illuminate your insula, right? People on your side are trying to manipulate your brains. How do you defeat that? By knowing people, by knowing human beings. So I've done experiments where I bring people together and I try to see how fast they'll fight and what I can do so that they can't fight, right? So I'll bring together like Trump and Sanders supporters. Turns out they actually have a lot alike. They're a lot alike. It's a very interesting thing. You know this because you're political science junkies, that in the 3 states that Trump won that turned the election in 2016, the margin of votes was less than the number of people who voted for Sanders in the Democratic primary and then crossed over for Trump in the general. Sanders voters got Trump elected, literally, in 2016, which is a very interesting thing. But on their face, they disagree on everything. They disagree on everything. So you bring them together like ordinary people, like just, mom or dad or, your Uncle Jim. And you bring them together and you say, talk about politics. It'll be like hammer and tongs. Like, now, if you start the conversation, you say, tell each other about your kids. They understand each other, they like each other, they're laughing. If they have teenage kids, they'll be like common enemy. It'll be like, oh, you think your teenagers are bad? Let me tell you about my teenagers. You think, well, your teenagers snuck out in high school, my teenagers stole a car in high school. I mean, and then they can't fight. After that, after they're talking about their kids, you say, okay, talk about politics. They say, oh, yeah, that's your opinion. No. Oh, I have a friend who thinks that just like you. Oh, that's so interesting. Why do you think that? What happened? You rewired the circuitry. You're going through different parts of the brain. You've activated the love circuits. You've actually stimulated a hormone, a neuropeptide that functions like a hormone that's produced in the human brain called oxytocin. Oxytocin is the love molecule. It's the hormone of human bonding. And when people look at each other and they talk about their children and things that they love and they tell each other their stories, they just can't hate each other after that. They just can't do it. So you want to have a good conversation this Thanksgiving with Aunt Marge, who talks about Trump all the time and bums you out because she loves him or hates him. I don't know. You want to know how to do that? You talk about human stuff first. Human stuff. You talk about, your grandparents that you loved and who passed away. You talk about, the baby that somebody's about to have. You talk about the happy memories and the things you used to do. And that's going to be this oxytocin. When she brings up Trump, nobody cares. That's your secret.
Mm-hmm. One at the end of this, this chapter that talks about that very point, you make an assertion that connection destroys discrimination.
Yeah.
Because that's the end. So it's those connections. So how do we make those connections? And you bring up a good example. We're all going to be around Thanksgiving dinner.
Yeah.
That's a time when this stuff happens.
Right.
Tell us, how do we make that connection that destroys that discrimination that sometimes exists? And it's discrimination, we know it, but also on the political side.
Yeah, well, to begin with, it's a lot of what we're talking about here. Get more oxytocin. Oxytocin is the connection hormone, and it's the anti-discrimination hormone. Actually, by the way, there's an interesting problem with oxytocin, which is that once you have a connection with another person, you can start to be discriminatory toward people in and out group, people who are not. In other words, it lowers empathy toward people who are not with you at the same time. So people who are not members of your family, is that you get us and them in a different way. So there's different problems that you might need to ameliorate. And there's lots of interesting studies on that. So you show that the most oxytocin producing experience that you can get is when you lay eyes on your newborn child. And one of the reasons is that you want to make sure that there's huge connection with a newborn child, even though you've never met this little human, and this little human is just squalling and demanding. You want to make sure that you would die for that person from the very beginning and you don't accidentally leave it on the bus or whatever, right? Just social scientists have no heart, so this is how we talk about things. So okay, the problem is that you also want to be vigilant of outsiders when you have this connection with this other particular person. So that's sort of the dark side of this oxytocin experience. One of the ways that so we can build up more connection with larger groups of people is to move away from the idea of bonding identities and go toward bridging stories. Now, this is a much more of a political science type of topic. And some of you all have heard of this. You all heard of social capital, probably. Social capital this goes back to the writings in the early 19th century of Alexis de Tocqueville in Democracy in America. He said, this is such a weird country. You don't need a government doing things so much. And you don't need rich people and wealthy people doing things so much. You need people banding together for their common interests. And that's a really big deal in Utah. You have this, every time I come here, people are talking about handcart pioneers, and probably some of your ancestors were handcart pioneers. There was no government here when they venture over the Wasatch Range. They're like, well, there's a big old salty lake. We got to do a lot of stuff for ourselves. And so that's what de Tocqueville was finding in the early 19th century. This is crazy. Well, that's what we think of today as civil society or social capital, the bonds between people. The connective tissue between people. And what's it made of? The cartilage is made of trust. It's just trust. That's what we have. And that's a magic and a beautiful thing. Low trust societies are miserable societies. High trust societies are happy societies. It's almost that clear because trust is very correlated with love, and love is the magic ingredient of all happiness. Okay, so when you go to very low trust societies, you find a lot of violence, a lot of cheating. You need a lot of police. You need a lot of lawyers. You need a lot of people that are going to actually short circuit the tendency to cheat each other. Now, most of you, I mean, when you go into the 7-Eleven and they give you $1 too much in change, you're like, you gave me too much change, and you give it back, right? Why? Because you want to live in a high trust society, and that's how you behave in a high trust society. That's how people trust each other. You make a mistake, somebody corrects you, and if it's not in your interest, you get your money back. That's a really beautiful thing, and that's a good thing. There's a famous book, by the way, that has a super politically incorrect title because it was written in 1958. It's called The Moral Basis of a Backward Society. You would never title a book that at this point because, you get canceled in like a second. But it was written by a Harvard political scientist named Edward Banfield, just an eminent, famous, genius. And what was he doing? He was comparing two towns, one in central Italy and one in central Utah. You know about this book?
No, I don't know
Moral
this one,
Basis
no.
of a Backward Society. You can still get it on the internet. They should rename it so that people wouldn't be like, ugh. So, and what was it doing? It was two towns of equal size. A little town in central Italy, and this is in the late 50s when central Italy, I mean, we think of Italy as this really modern, pretty rich country. It was not. It was really poor in the post-war era. And then this little town in Utah, the same population, the same basic demographics. And he compared, this political scientist, he lived for a year in that town in Italy, and then he lived here, someplace in this state. I don't even remember what the town was. They were fake names for the town, so who knows? It could be anything. And he was comparing what was going on. In the town in Italy, they have an orphanage in the town in Italy, and the local bricklayers who were out of work wouldn't donate a minute of their labor to rebuild a wall at this local orphanage, which was falling down around them, even though all the orphans were from their town. Whereas and he goes to Utah, and they're running a penny drive to help people 2 towns over they've never met. And he talks about all this volunteer activity that's going on. And the conclusion of the book was low trust, high trust. Unhappy, happy. Unprosperous, prosperous. You get the point. And he said, that's the secret, man. That is the secret to all the things that we're trying to do. And so that's ultimately what we're trying to build, is one in which there's a high trust society. Now the bad news, friends, we're going the wrong direction. We're becoming a backward society, in the words of Edward Banfield, because our trust is falling. This has nothing to do with intelligence or education or any of the stuff that you'd look at as a social scientist. Trust is what's falling in this country, and it's taking us in the wrong direction for our happiness, for our growth, for our prosperity, for our freedom, and all the things that we like.
It's interesting when you talk about trust and getting to know people better. You're in Utah, so I may as well have you talk about this story, which I think is funny. You have a BYU story,
Yeah.
as we call it, the school down south.
Mm-hmm.
A briefcase story. This is a little bit about walking a mile in someone's shoes.
Yeah.
Maybe talk about that for just a moment, because we have to learn how to do this.
Yeah, but I mean, every time I come to Utah, somebody brings up the briefcase story. I've been telling you the briefcase story in Utah since 2007, when most of you were, yeah.
I'll talk about what we're going to give you then, because the Hinckley Institute is going to up the game.
Man, I'm going to get like a suitcase or something. I say
Find a suitcase.
Yeah, it's like a Hinckley Institute Samsonite. Anyway, so years ago when I first started coming to Utah, this was way back when I was teaching at Syracuse University. So this was like 2 careers ago for me. I had worked with a guy who became the dean of the Marriott School of Business at BYU. And he was on a sabbatical in my first academic job. I was teaching at Georgia State University in Atlanta. I got to meet this guy and said, what a great guy. What a terrific guy. He said, you should come out to BYU and give a lecture at BYU. And I'm like, yeah, sure, totally. I hear it's great. So I came out here in Happy Valley. Everybody's nice. Salt Lake City, super beautiful. Utah's one of the best. And I started, coming back. The second time that I came, you get a lot of swag when you're here in Utah, because people are generous. And I usually want candy, but I get stuff anyway. So they gave me a briefcase that said Brigham Young University on it, on a briefcase. And I already had a briefcase, so I'm like, I don't know. So I put it in my suitcase and I brought it home. And my wife said, what'd they give you out in Utah? And I said, they gave me this Brigham Young University briefcase, but I don't need it. My briefcase is perfectly fine. I threw it in the closet. A couple of weeks later, the briefcase handle for the briefcase I was carrying around broke. And I'm like, I just got this thing, cheap piece of junk. And my wife's like, why don't you get that BYU briefcase you brought home and carry it around? I'm like, I don't know. She says, what are you, chicken? You chicken, you're thinking that people are going to think you're LDS? I'm not, I'm Catholic, right? And I'm like, no, I'm not chicken. I'm not afraid. I was a little afraid. So, but no, I mean, the gauntlet has been, the challenge has been laid down. So I go to the closet, I get my BYU briefcase. I take my stuff out, I put it in my BYU briefcase. I start carrying around my BYU briefcase. And I travel all the time. I was traveling a lot then. I travel 50 weeks a year now. I'm on the road all the time. But then I was still traveling a fair amount, and I noticed every time I was in an airport carrying my BYU briefcase, it brands you. You carry around something that says something on it, they read that, and then they think something about you. It didn't occur to me. But I would notice, this is a weird thing, I'd notice that people would read my briefcase and then look up at me. And they're like, oh, that's a Mormon, right? I could tell it on their faces. That's a Latter-day Saint right there. But, outside they call you guys, if you're LDS, they call you Mormons. We're not supposed to say Mormons anymore. But anyway, that's what, that's a Mormon guy. And that's weird because that's the first, aging hipster Mormon I've ever seen. People say, that doesn't look, All right. But here's the weird part about that. It started changing my behavior carrying a BYU briefcase. I started being nicer. Why? Because I've never seen an unfriendly Mormon in the airport. I've never seen, no, and it started, so I was like super nice at the ticket counter. Oh, no, it's no problem that you gave away my seat. It's no problem I have to sleep in the terminal. Well, it's okay, Not that, it's like, I don't know. But I don't want to besmirch the reputation of a group of people that have always been so kind to me and have always seemed so nice. I also stopped carrying around a big cup of coffee. I've been addicted to coffee since I was 13. I grew up next to the only Starbucks in the world in Seattle, Washington, right? I'm so addicted. My brain is like wired for coffee. And so I'd carry around a venti, 20-ounce Starbucks cup, not with a BYU briefcase, I didn't. Why? Because I don't want somebody to go home and say, I saw this Mormon guy in the airport in Chicago, and wouldn't you know it, big cup of coffee. I knew they were hypocrites, right? It's like, what's the point? You brand yourself, you live up to your own reputation. Isn't that a beautiful thing that we can actually do about ourselves? And the lesson for that was, lash yourself to the mast and make a commitment to a certain type of behavior. So what I learned from that, for example, is that I will commit myself on social media publicly, I've got a pretty public career and a pretty public life, to never being a jerk. I will never be a jerk. Now, I've written, I will never do it. I will never be anonymous. I will never be contemptuous. I will never be sarcastic. I will never. If I do, I'm going to hear about it, right? And so I branded myself. I'm permanently carrying a BYU briefcase. Now it would be a UU briefcase, by the way. Yes. So yeah, because,
Thank
you. Like I know my audience. So, and that's important for all of us to be able to do. That's one of the reasons that we get back to the whole point that you made about anonymity.
Or you want to take a couple questions?
I'm willing to take any minutes we've got time for.
Julia, you got a microphone there? Okay, if you got a question, raise your hand, speak into the microphone. See right here.
So within a lot of online spaces that you see right now, you see a lot of disparity for civility politics, specifically with reference to, at least, and I guess I will be biased, because of the type of media that I consume. You probably see it on both sides of the aisle, but I specifically see it from people, I guess, who are affiliated with the left, and they see the Democratic Party, and they usually point to people like Barack Obama and Mitch McConnell and what took place with the Supreme Court, where Mitch McConnell said, oh, you can't appoint somebody because it's your last year in office, and then he did that with Donald Trump, or he made no such argument with Donald Trump, and the idea is kind of like with Obama and the Democrats and all these people, because they weren't willing to fight the same fight that I guess you could say Mitch McConnell and the rest of the Republicans, if you want to generalize, were fighting. That put I guess the Democrats at a disadvantage. So sorry for the wordy question.
Fine. You're making a good point.
But yeah, I guess kind of what is your opinion about the state of politics? Yeah. With that.
No, so let me see if I'm summarizing it the right way. Being nice all that will do is play into the other side, and you'll get taken advantage of if you're too nice, right? There's nothing about love and kindness that rules out fighting hard for your principles. What it does rule out is dehumanizing your opponent. You know, there's nothing wrong with believing things strongly and having a serious competition of ideas. Politics is a tough business, right? And you know, you don't need to be, you know, somebody who cedes authority in every realm to other people. You don't need to be, you know, naive or stupid about the things that you do. The problem is when you basically dehumanize your opponents to the point where you're acting as if they weren't your neighbors. They're not citizens like you. They don't have equal human dignity. That's when things really, really become a problem. So for example, you know, you can have, you know, you can imagine lots of cases in which people are just, I mean, really going after each other in very serious policy terms and giving no quarter to the other particular ideas, but who treat each other with basic humanity. That's actually what most Americans want. Well, the reason that we're having these problems today is not because we disagree too much. The problem is that we disagree very poorly. Our disagreement technique is in the toilet. Now, there's a reason for that too. 94% of Americans hate how divided we become as a country. The other 6% who don't hate it are profiting from it. Now, I can imagine all kinds of reasons that politicians should be tougher in the case of the Supreme Court fights that you were talking about. But I can think of no cases in which we should say the other sides are fascists and stupid and evil. No cases whatsoever in which that's actually even remotely justified. Ultimately, by the way, that's counterproductive to the people who are actually making those particular arguments. There's a lot of evidence to that effect. People don't want that. I mean, just look at the dynamics of the sort of the ping pong ball of American politics. And you're going to find, especially after the fact, that the people who are most disparaging, the most insulting, they have immediate success and long-term failure. And the long-term failure is a lot more significant than the short-term success, is actually what we're seeing. You'll also find people that are, you know, excellent people, like Barack Obama and Mitt Romney. Remember back in 2012, I mean, that's the sands of time. It's 10 years ago, so all of you are really, really young. I remember when I admired both people running for president. Crazy. That's like, what was that, the 19th century, man? No, that was 2012. That was 10 years ago. And it's like, yeah, I could live with either one. I voted for one over the other, but I could live with either one. A big part of that was not that they had even remotely similar policy positions. It had everything to do with they were both decent, admirable, family men, and good people. That's really what it was all about to me, and that's where I want to get back to. I don't want to agree. Agreement is mediocre and boring. You know, we need a competition of ideas in this country, but we don't need hatred, because the hatred is ultimately, completely, unilaterally destructive. It's a great question.
Someone else?
Thank you. Do you have any suggestions for what we can do as like individuals and maybe as like University of Utah students and then maybe even as Americans? Different like tiers of what we can do about this?
About the hatred and contempt problem?
Yes.
Yeah, I do. The answer to that is be a missionary for love. Be a missionary for it. Now, have any of you ever met a missionary? I'm kidding. I know, I'm in Utah. I know, I'm in Utah. At Harvard, everybody's like, nope, never. So what missionaries all have in common, this really weird thing that missionaries all have in common, is that they face enormous amounts of resistance and rejection, and yet they're happy. Right? Now, so any of you who went, did any of you, by the way, have any of you gone on a mission? Have any of you been on a mission? Some of you have been on a mission, okay. The beginning is hard because it tends to be quite isolating, right? But it ultimately is for most missionaries, it's a very beautiful experience that they remember. And their missionaries for any church will tell you that everybody was slamming doors in my face, day after day after day after day after day, because nobody says, hey, everybody, great news, there's missionaries on the porch. Nobody's ever said that in human history, right? It's always like, pretend we're not home, right? So why are they so happy? Because missionaries bring truth where there's lies. They bring light where there's darkness. What a privilege to be able to do that. So this is the key thing. Look, if you're with me, man, if you're with me and wanting to bring love where there's hate in our country and save our country, this is missionary work, not religious. This is secular missionary work. And to do that, you got to go where there's hatred. You got to go, there's resistance. You got to go where people are non-believers to this, and you surround it with your love. So you got to, sorry, you're Democrat or Republican? You're libertarian. Yeah. Okay, so you got a strong point of view, right? You got no matter where you go, because 3% of Americans are libertarian. So 97% of America is like, what? You want what? That's insane. Got it. I have a lot of libertarian friends. I know the resistance that you put up with. So go looking for people who strongly disagree with you and be the most loving person they've ever met. That's apostolate. That will solve problems right there. That's the witness of your character, talking about the hottest, most controversial things you can possibly imagine and being like, yeah, man, I love you. Bring it on. It's so good. Yeah.
Right here, Julia.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions, but this thought came to me, and I think it's important to ask. So in public discourse, is it much of a identity problem as much as a contempt problem?
Tell me more
As
about
in,
what you
like,
mean.
Americans, we don't view ourselves, a lot of people don't view ourselves as Americans, we view ourselves as Democrats or liberals
Right.
or conservatives or Republicans.
Yeah.
And I guess this kind of heart of Americans is kind of fading away from public discourse. There's nothing that kind of unifies us as a people.
Yeah. There are actually a lot of things that unify us as a people, but there are a lot of things fragmenting us
Yeah.
as a people too. I think that's your point, right? So the answer to the question backs up a little bit. We're in a huge, I study happiness. Happiness is in decline in this country and has been for a long time. All the way back to about 1990, happiness on average has been declining in this country. This is largely a crisis of meaning. And there's a lot of things that goes into that, falling religious practice and a much, much weaker sense of how family plays into things, and all these sociological and psychological variables play into it. But the bottom line is fewer people have a strong sense of overriding purpose in their lives. The happiness crisis is a meaning and purpose crisis. When you have trouble finding meaning, and by the way, if you want to find meaning, the two questions to ask yourself are, why am I alive, and for what would I be willing to die? Those are the two meaning questions. If you don't have an answer to that, go looking, and you'll actually find more purpose and meaning in your life. But when people don't have that, other people will offer you purpose and meaning. And those people don't have your interests at heart. The people who are going to offer you purpose and meaning, or they might, but they might not. And what we have in this country is this zombie religion of identity politics that has all of these religious characteristics of my tribe, my group, my team, in-group, out-group. You're not on my team. You're not a believer. You're a heretic. You're a pagan. This is a really dangerous thing to do. Look, some of you think that's a dangerous thing to do with real religion. Fake religion? Oh my goodness. Why? Because the fake religion of politics, when it comes to identity, it has messianic figures, and it's got secret language, and it's got all this stuff that real religions have. What it doesn't have is forgiveness. It doesn't have love. It doesn't have redemption. None of that. And that's the reason we're in this culture war, because we have these zombie cults that are these identities in politics. What solves that? Number one, put politics in its proper place. It's not religion. It's just an organizing way for us to get candidates in office and for us to organize more or less around certain things that we think and build coalitions and try to get better public policies. That's it, man. That's it. That's what politics is. It's not religion. And it's filling the vacuum. It's backfilling the vacuum that's actually created by the reduction in a lot of these senses of meaning. So what do we need instead? And the answer to identity politics is shared story, is a shared story of actually who we are as people. That gets back to something I briefly touched on before. There's two kinds of social capital. There's bonding and there's bridging. Bonding social capital is what you and I have in common, and they're not us. My team, your team, in-group, out-group. All the people who are not us, they're not so good. Right? That gives us a warm, bonded feeling. That's identity politics. Bridging social capital is the connective tissue between you and me because we're different. That's this ideology, or sort of this diversity that is the strength of a community. When people have this bridging, the sense of we're Americans, we're humans, if you're religious, we're children of God. And the fact is that we're all different, and that's what makes it even stronger and even more beautiful. That's harder. That's a really much harder thing to do. The easiest thing for a politician or for an ideologue or for a campus activist is to fire you up with bonding social capital, in-group, out-group, and make you aggrieved of the fact that you don't have as much power because of your identity. The hardest thing to do is say we're all part of the same group of people who have radically equal human dignity, and we're all sisters and brothers, and we're going to work to bring each other together and lift each other up. But that's what great leaders do, and that's the answer to identity politics.
Thank you. Natalie Gardner's going to have to take you to your next appointment, but
Yeah.
this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Let's give it for Dr. Brooks.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Great to be with you.